I'll give you one that was the furthest away. Was we recorded a hip hop song,
Yes.
all about customer success, and it's on Spotify, Apple Music. You can listen to it now. Very hard to track a Spotify listen to an enterprise software deal. But what we did find is when we actually released the song, we got a little spike in traffic because we had something compelling, a cool piece of content that went out there. And that spike in traffic, we could correlate to contact sales form fills and, demo requests and all that sort of thing.
Hello, Anthony. How's it going?
Really good. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Thank you for taking the time. I think the main thing that I want to get across is sort of demystifying brand and how strange it is. And so my first question is, what did the Lakers mean to you? And what was that moment where you became a Lakers fan?
I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles playing basketball. I think I had a basketball in my hand when I was like, I don't know, maybe in the crib. I don't know if that's factually accurate, but certainly when I was young. But I really started playing sports as Kobe Bryant got into the league in the mid to late 90s. And if you're, a sports fan growing up in Los Angeles in the 90s and 2000s, it was really all about the Lakers. And maybe in the 80s, it was the Showtime era Lakers. So there was definitely like a big aura around that team. And so today, fast forward, we've obviously gone through for any Warrior fans in the area, whoever you're listening in from. The Lakers took a back seat for several years, and now we're finally kind of back up on top. So for me now, it's more than just sports. It's more than just being a fan. It's like a piece of my childhood. It's a piece of my life, and so. I know it's kind of a lot to say for sports, but sports has a way of really, I think, bringing up either our nostalgia or different kind of parts of our life that mean a lot to us. So it's more than a game for me, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I'm asking this is I feel like there's this so I spent the whole of yesterday reading your books and listening to podcasts that you were in, and I feel like there's a sports analogy with brand. So here's my question, which is, do you think that brands, companies, even like B2B companies, like Front or Gainsight, can elicit that same level of love and passion that you have for the Lakers?
Yeah. Well, 1000% they can, right? And in fact, I'd argue if you're a B2B business that isn't aspiring to do that, then you're on the wrong track. Because we see it in the B2C world. We see that many examples. I think it was last week or something that Sony released the PS5. And the whole world knows that this thing's come out because you can't go on social media without seeing folks referring to it. Thinking about growing up, people were camping out for video games or whatever. And so, try to find somebody that follows Xbox and put a PS5 in front of them. It's like a religious battle, I'm sure. And so in the B2C world, we've made a lot of purchasing decisions emotionally, not just based on kind of some rational thought. You can frankly play the same game on an Xbox and a PS5, but you choose one over the other very intentionally. And similarly with B2B, that's the case. And why is that? Well, all products to some extent are on a natural path towards commoditization. You could think of file sharing. If I have a file I want to share with any of you, there's 75 different tools that I can use to get that file over to you. But I choose to use Box because I have affinity for that brand and that company. And so all of our jobs as marketers or entrepreneurs, founders, is to build a product that has build more than just a product, but build a company that can create, that can inspire a market, that could convict people behind some bigger belief. Some of that comes in the form of your product, but it's also your thought leadership and your content and your events and your community. And it's this bigger, why do you exist? And that's what I think is part of the brand sort of recipe is being able to articulate a core value proposition that goes beyond your product about the problems you want to solve in the market, and doing it in a way that gets people to say, I believe that too. So that's why I think it's pretty critical in B2B.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just assume there's someone skeptical, right? Over here, or someone listening to the recording or like the podcast form of this later on. Hey, Anthony, this is great. I agree with you, but like I'm selling to government employees. I'm selling trucking software. Like, does this really apply to me? Like, isn't this just like a coast thing that cool kids like Front and Gainsight do? Like, how does this apply to me?
Well, I mean, I think that,
Yeah. Sorry.
yeah,
Go on.
no. In general, I would ask if these government employees or truckers or whoever, if they're humans, then I think it applies to you. If you're selling to like a machine that doesn't have emotions, then I maybe not. But I think the core kind of hypothesis is all of our expectations are changing from a consumer perspective. Like we have, this thing that we carry around that has, the world's library of music accessible to us for $9 a month. Mm-hmm. If I need baby formula by midnight, I can press a button in suburban Arizona here and have it delivered to my front door in the next 3 hours. Like in the consumer world, we are changing how we interact with companies and how we interact with brands. And in B2B, we're only in like chapter 1 of people believing this is true. So it sounds radical to you and to other, and how you pose a question to some folks. But it's actually not. It's actually, we're just laggards. And I think the best companies that have figured it out in B2B have done it in a way that they've, it's like this secret. And I'll call out some other examples, like Drift does a really good job of this. They've built a lot of content and a lot of different programs that meet their market where they are. And what, the product, this is now a sort of leading indicator. Brand interaction and brand engagement is a leading indicator to pipeline creation, which is a leading indicator to ARR. So that's why I think this is a powerful concept to grasp. But I would argue whoever you sell to, doesn't matter how regulated the industry is, if they have some humanity in them, then it's worth doing.
Yeah, like why do you think the B2B world has not caught up to this? I think you alluded to this in the LinkedIn thing.
Yeah.
A little bit. Like, what are the biggest misconceptions? Like, why haven't there's got to be some reason, right?
Well, it's a hypothesis, but at least what I've seen is when you traditionally talk to a lot of B2B founders or board members or whatever, and traditionally, I don't know if this is necessarily the case today, but when you talked about brand, it felt like it was this other thing. It's like I'm focused on demand gen, on positioning the product and all that. Like, don't talk to me about brand. Like, we have to hit the pipeline target, or we have to hit our number this quarter. And brand felt like it was disconnected from the growth equation for a company. And I think the reason we've been tripped up over this is we have this concept of corporate marketing in B2B, which is like swag for employees and maybe doing like a company event, and all that stuff is really important. But corporate marketing has always been viewed as something that's like additive to the growth machine and not an integrated part of it. And so I think the big realization that we're starting to have is doing things like this, right? Hosting virtual events and being able to connect with people as close to face as the public health officials will let us, but being able to be more than just a blog post, more than just a cold email. Like, all of these things are actually helping accelerate the sales cycle. They're helping start new conversations. Stephanie and I might talk about the Knicks, after this and say like, hey, that was a really interesting interaction. We might learn more about our shared services, and that sparks a conversation that turns into a deal, right? So all of these tactics are no longer they're now more appreciated as ways to start in sales conversations. And ultimately, we can attribute a lot more from content and events and community and all these things to how pipelines either created or accelerated. And beyond that, how our customers are renewing and staying with us over time, and maybe even expanding with us because they want to be a part of the movement that we're creating. So that's why I think the disconnect is. It's that brand is disconnected from growth, and that's just is totally not true.
I think one of the other reasons that I'm thinking about that I would love to get your take on that is this idea of being able to measure it, right? It's like, I can't measure my brand, right? It's this sort of elusive thing that happens in the air, that is sort of in the ether, and like,
Totally. Well, I think there might be folks that are much more sophisticated in attribution than I. I think there's a simplistic way to think about it, which is, we're hosting an event right now on Sling Show. There's, I'm not sure how many people are tuned in right now, but say there's, we'll stroke the ego. There's 10,000 people logged in right now. These are now 10,000 people that, you potentially can pull into your marketing automation system, right? They registered on Sling Show, and now there's like consent to potentially email. As folks do that, there's like the unique net new people that came in. Some might've been through some social amplification that, you guys did, or I did, or somebody else might've seen a post. It could have been email that went out to your customer base that got forwarded. And we're going to be able to say after this, like these are how many net new people came into the funnel. And then these are how many people that were in our funnel already, whether we're talking to them about a product or not, that are engaging with us and they're coming and they're participating in this program. So right there is a indicator, a measurement of value, right? Or of engagement with the brand. Now, not everyone's going to be, buying software afterwards, but a good proportion of people hopefully might. And then that's how we sort of start saying, all right, so who of the people that are engaging are, showing signal that they might be ready to buy the product? You might use more traditional demand gen tactics there, lead scoring. For the right healthy leads, you might have a BDR call into those accounts or whatever. And so I can't think of anything that we've ever done that didn't have some type of measurement. And maybe I'll give you one that was the furthest away. Was we recorded a hip hop song, all of customer success, and it's on Spotify, Apple Music. You can listen to it now. Very hard to track a Spotify listen to an enterprise software deal. But what we did find is when we actually released the song, we got a little spike in traffic because we had something compelling, a cool piece of content that went out there. And that spike in traffic, we could correlate to contact sales form fills and, demo requests and all that sort of thing. So while it's not perfectly attributable, what did we do that week that was different, that caused some type of activity? I think we can create some type of, we can draw kind of a line to it and make a case for it. So I understand how brand in general is somewhat ambiguous because we can't kind of give you the full kind of roadmap to that customer journey and how they became a customer, but you can get pretty close. And I think close enough that a CFO would appreciate it and be able to believe in it.
So what should people do to build brand? Like, what are the top 3 things that I can do right now or, this week that moves us in that direction of building a brand and moves us away from the traditional sort of really measuring the ROI at this very second?
Yeah, I think the first part is understanding or being able to articulate the why behind your company. So what does that mean? We spend a lot of time talking about the what, our products. We talk about like feature functionality, what are the different capabilities of the product? And that's important. There's a role for that. So I'm not diminishing that by any means. But being able to articulate not just why your product can solve these problems and for the market, but why are you as a company interested in solving this problem? What is the unique perspective you have in the world that says things should not be the way they are? And so our product exists and our company exists to help change those things. So, I've referred to it as like a manifesto or something. Like being able to articulate the why it's a foundational exercise. And it's one that, founders and entrepreneurs, I think a lot of this is why you started the business. So it lives in your heart and in your head. And our job as marketers is to transcribe that as much as we can and get it down on paper. But you might also ask customers, why are they on this journey with you? And what do they see in the world that, what are they believing in what you're saying? So that articulation is very important. What you can then do is, maybe that, manifesto, that blog post, whatever it is, however you get it down on paper, what would it look like if you turned that into an ebook? Something that was like a foundational long form asset that somebody can download, and you can drive some demand around that belief system that you're sort of putting out there. What's interesting about that is, or at least the exercise that I've kind of encouraged folks to do, is an ebook forces you to break that down to more than just like the philosophy, but what are like the 12 laws of this new world? It might be, that in our case, customer success was the broad manifesto, and that people should think about managing churn and creating kind of more proactive upsell kind of expansion opportunities, and being predictive of their customer health, just like we do for net new business, just like we do for closing deals in the first place. And then we have 10 laws. And one of the laws was sell to the right customer. So 12 is interesting because those 12 chapters could become a 12-month content strategy for the business. It could be, a blog post a month, a webinar a month, when we get back in person, a field marketing event or a dinner topic. And you've built now an entire year of your kind of brand strategy off of putting that one piece of content together. So those are some of the sort of starting points that I'd consider. But I think some of the things you should really think about too is, do it from a place of authenticity, where you can talk about, because when you talk about why, you're talking about, more than just kind of the dollars and cents, but like the change that you want to see in the world. Do it from a place of authenticity, maybe in vulnerability if you're open to it, because I think there's something really powerful in that. Then the third, the best brands, as we're seeing it in the world, even in B2B, are kind of rooted in purpose. And then there's some type of community activation around that. And so thinking about how can we really get folks to be inspired by this message that we're putting out there, whether it's our customers, whether it's the broader market at large. And so those are maybe a couple of guiding principles to consider as well.
So there's this thing about, just distribution channels and go to market. Like over time, they get saturated, right? Mm-hmm. And that distribution channel over time just doesn't work, right? Like the classic example here is like Facebook ads used to do amazing, or Google SEO used to be amazing, and they just don't work anymore. And I wonder if you feel this way about blog posts. Everyone is just putting stuff out constantly. It's almost like spam. Should we make a single on Spotify, like to stand out? Like what should we do to differentiate ourselves in the marketing strategy, right?
The direct answer is yes to issuing a single on Spotify, by the way. That's the anthem for your community. I know it's very, very true, right? Like, how many emails do we get every day from vendors that we're sort of smart enough to like delete the ones we know are coming from a marketing automation campaign? The channels are becoming super, super saturated. In the case of blog posts, what I would say is it sort of depends. It depends on the problem that you're solving in the marketplace, how competitive your specific industry is, or just the market that you're operating in, or even the attention for the audience that you're trying to get a hold of. Because I do think that what blog posts can be pretty powerful from a long tail organic search perspective. What do I mean by that? People, and when I say people are buying things emotionally, people are going to search for solutions to their problems, and they're going to go to Google and they're going to type in, how do I run a QBR, a quarterly business review with a customer? And they're going to search that. And there's an opportunity for you to have a piece of content, a blog post or whatever, that ranks, that's optimized around that search. And so if you show up first and you're able to deliver value, now no one's ever heard of Gainsight in this case, but there's a blog post that we had written, and you might discover us for the first time. We might go on and subscribe to the newsletter. You might click around and figure out that this is actually a software company. In some cases, you might be cookied and see some ads in the future, right? Like all that sort of stuff, the digital marketing tactics come into play. But this idea of like being able to deliver free value through our blog post and meeting the potential buyer where they are, or user where they are in that journey, is a very powerful moment. Because the alternative is we're acquiring names in a sort of transactional way. We're buying lists, we're doing this type of stuff. And those don't tend to be, those might be a way to hit the number kind of, short term, medium term, but those aren't sort of the customers for life. And I think the best customers that you acquire, the best customers that stay with you for a while and they buy your products and they're going to give you high NPS scores, they're the ones who have sort of a relationship established with you. And I think if you're able to deliver value and acquire customers from a more value-driven way, it's going to be sort of healthier revenue over time. So I'm an advocate for blog posts. And again, if you are selling, just to go over my earlier conversation, like the 75th file sharing product, there might be too much already written on that topic, and you've got to, start the file sharing podcast or whatever and find different ways to break out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, is there something during your time at Gainsight that looking back that you're really proud of that, oh, wow, we thought about that, we did that? I'm excluding the Spotify single.
Yeah.
Is there another thing that you did on a tactical basis that you're really proud of looking back?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, and I think Nilay, you'll appreciate this on the event side, was hosting an event. And our story was, we had been, Nick, our CEO, and I were at the company for about 2 months at the time, not very long. And we were trying to figure out, like, what is our core value proposition? What market are we operating in? What I assume many founders are thinking through as well. We had some conviction that there was this emerging job title called the customer success manager, and there was no one that was really championing that persona. That if we found a way to get these people together, maybe some magic will happen, right? And we had that conviction because we would go to some of these meetups around the Valley and out in the Bay Area, and it wasn't like a fancy event or anything, but people had this feeling of like, my gosh, I'm finally around other people that are going through what I'm going through, and they're really kind of had this kind of sense of belonging. And so we said, if we basically did a meetup, but put a little bit more investment into it, and got some good speakers, and a fancy stage with lighting and all that, like what would that look like? And we were able to get 300 people there in our first year, which I suppose now is like nothing, but back then, like 300 people for a basically seed stage company just turned Series A.
Did you have a product back then?
We had a product. We had probably like 5 customers though, and a few hundred K of ARR. It wasn't a big business by any means.
What made you take that, which is the exact opposite of what everyone is doing, right? Like that was one of the things that I really liked about your book, was that it was really counterintuitive, like compared to all the other stuff that people talk about when they talk about marketing. Like most of the times it's, a lot about, when founders are being talked at, it's about like, find a big market, find a problem in it, solve the problem in the big market, and this is what like VCs are looking for. And, you essentially did the exact opposite, which is, hey, here's a really small market and we're going to grow the market. Is this an outlier?
I don't think so. I think, who was it? Somebody was talking a lot about like owning your niche. I forget, there's someone on the marketing founder somewhere, entrepreneur influencer community. Somebody was talking about that. So I don't think it's an outlier. I do think it's sort of making a conscious decision to take an alternative path to building a business, because the way if we did what Gartner was asking us to do, we would have positioned as a CRM solution, but it would have missed the nuance, and it would have missed like what makes Gainsight different. What made us like better in the marketplace was not that we were a Salesforce clone. It was that we did something that they didn't do. And so the reality is, I don't think a lot of companies set out to create a category, create a market, but you sort of just start seeing things and you're like, gosh, there isn't a lot of competition out there that's doing what we're doing, or, people are really struggling to understand this concept, but we know it's really valuable for our customers that have it. Those are some signals that you're like, gosh, I think this might be our journey. Like, this is how the only way out is through it. And the only way out is to will this market or this belief into existence. And so that's what we chose to do. But there are several other examples, right? I think HubSpot did the same with inbound marketing. There wasn't anything like inbound marketing before. Drift is doing it with conversational marketing, I think they call it. But, they've sort of surpassed what Intercom has built in some cases here, and at least from a thought leadership perspective. So I think, Gong is actually a great example too. Like, how many of us knew what conversational AI meant? How many of us were comfortable with a sales rep recording a call that we were on like 2 years ago, right? So they've sort of said, we're just going to like relentlessly focus on educating the market on why this matters. and years later it works. So I don't think it's necessarily a fluke, but to your point, it's counterintuitive to what conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley is, which is it's all about TAM. And so although that, there is some truth there, there is a way to grow your TAM. And I think that's kind of the story of Gainsight.
Yeah. How do you describe the balance between creating a new category versus latching onto an existing market, right? Yeah. You talk about this idea of you can't just force it down people's throat, so to speak, right? Like they have to sort of accept it. And like, I'm wondering, what does that balance look like between a push and pull? Like, were there times at Gainsight where you would, put out a blog post or put out a philosophy of customer success and the customer was like, nope, that I don't agree with that?
I'm sure there was. I don't have a lot of like great anecdotes, but most definitely there were things we did that didn't resonate. But I think actually, come to think of it, the posture we took as a brand wasn't one of saying we are the experts at this. It was one as we are the facilitators of this new movement, and all of you are the co-authors, and we're going to help all of us get to that next stage. So I'm not directly answering your question. I'll get to that in a second. But like that is, I think, an important nuance that when you're creating something new, claiming that you're the expert in something new is false. But building sort of the platform so that everyone from a small company that's building customer success from the ground up and dealing with like, how do I scale my team of 3 to be able to manage our customer base, to Cisco or Microsoft, hiring 10,000 CSMs, the range of use cases and best practices is so wide, we would be foolish to say that we know it all. But we could get all these people together and have them share their story on stage on a conference, on a podcast, on a blog, whatever the case is. So I think that's an important nuance. But your question, I believe, was like, how do you know to do this? What's the difference between this and disrupting something that's already existing? And I think the main difference is this. In a disruption motion, you have a problem that is pretty widely understood. Like it makes a lot of sense that closing your sales target, hitting your sales number is hard, and you have to do it in order to grow your company, right? And so, or exist as a company. So that's a well understood problem. Now there's thousands of vendors that offer solutions to help you do that. And you can just think of any MarketScape, certainly in the marketing tech, that shows you all of the different slices of how solutions can solve that problem. So your job as a marketer in this case is to either take a challenger position against whoever is leading that market, or be the leader in that market. Well, one of the two kind of options, right? In category creation, or in a category creation motion, you're starting to position a problem that people don't know they have yet. And that's the complexity, is that you almost have two products. You have the problem and positioning the problem enough and evangelizing the problem, educating the world that this is a problem worth solving, and also positioning your solutions as a way to sort of address that. And that's where I think this becomes really, really complex. So, we all felt the pain of, I don't know, calling a cab if you're not in New York City, where it's super easy to call a cab, or like there's no way we're paying for a black car or whatever, like car service, but we just need to get from point A to point B. I grew up again in Los Angeles, being able to take a cab was something we just never really did. We didn't think about this idea of a Uber-like service or a Lyft-like service. And so they position the problem saying, like, this is actually fundamentally broken. There needs to be a much easier way for folks to get from point A to point B, in a way that's cost efficient and fast and safe and all of these different kind of things. So a good portion of their marketing engine isn't just here's a great product, but it's here's why safety matters when driving or when traveling. So anyway, that's just one kind of example, but that's, I think, the trick with creating a category. It's how do you sort of spin up your resources to do, when you're a small team, especially, to position both a problem set as well as a product.
Is your advice, should most people try and carve out their own category? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, should most people just kind of go with it the way they're doing, and here's the market, here's the product? Or how much value is there in carving out your own category? I think that you have this chapter in the book where you talk about, if category creation doesn't really apply to you, if you're a big company, or if you're a startup like already that is kind of a little bit established in a space, should you try and differentiate and create a new category, or is this like only for certain instances, or can anyone do it?
Yeah. Well, I told myself if I ever wrote a sequel to the book, it would be called "Don't Create a Category." And the reason is, I say that in jest a little bit, or maybe a little clickbait in the book. But I think the core idea is, some people just like our earlier conversation, like you have to do it. Like that's sort of the problem that you identified, and your only chance of survival is to get other people to believe in the problem and how you see it. So category creation wasn't a choice for Gainsight. It was existentially, what we had to do. But for the important piece is that the underlying mechanics of how to do it are the same as to whether or not you are disrupting a company, existing category, or creating a new one. And that's where brand is so powerful, because ultimately, if you're an existing company that's operating in a very crowded space, the core idea is how do we differentiate? How do we stand out? And how do we gain market share? If you're a startup starting into a crowded space, I think I see a comment here about WebEx, and maybe Zoom is the perfect example of this. Mm-hmm. Zoom was like the 105th video conferencing tool, right? But they killed it, right? With a great product, and took this kind of different position. So being able to articulate a problem set in a new way, to build a community that speaks it back to you and validates that pain, and then you owning kind of the oxygen around that pain, that's something that matters whether you're creating category or not. I will say that for those that do want to create the category, the reason I say don't do it is that it's a long road. And in a lot of cases, it's expensive. Meaning a lot of budget to do, our first 3 months to do a conference for 300 people was kind of insane. And you need a lot of belief at the business and at the board that this is a long game that's worth investing in. We had a lot of conviction at Gainsight, and I think over time we saw enough signal that said we were right, and we just had to keep going. But it takes, I think, a certain type of profile of a person, a human, to want to do this. But to companies that are able to create a category and then go on and dominate it, we've seen a lot of data that suggests that there's a higher proportion of market share relative to their peer set, and higher valuation attributed to those businesses. So we know that there's a monetary component to doing it, but again, it's a hard road. If you have a product in a market that's obvious and a potential buyer, like, go for it. But I'd say brand is still going to be your the wind kind of behind that powers your sail moving forward.
Would you say that Front is creating a category or not?
Well, I made the move because I honestly, first of all, I could have stayed at Gainsight forever. I definitely felt a deep emotional connection with the team and the product and the market and the community, everything we're building. But, felt like at some point I'd have to leave. So after 7 years, decided to do that. And what I think I really wanted to do next in my career was to bring a lot of the same practices. Well, we'll talk about the category side, but a lot of the same, the magic that we were able to create at Gainsight, but to do it in a much bigger market. And I can't think of a bigger market than email. Literally it's the ubiquitous way that we communicate, right? I mean, we use different things. We use Slack, we use video, we use all these different tools, but it all ends up back in the inbox. That's where we live. And so over 1 billion knowledge workers in the world are on email, use email for work. So me personally, a chance to take a lot of the stuff that we built in a very, growing a community, but then do it on a much bigger scale was sort of the opportunity. And I fell in love with the product and the mission and what Mathilde, our CEO, was really casting out. So that's why I joined. Now, I don't know that Front is creating a category necessarily. I think the way I would describe it is that we're sort of carving out our space and trying to define a new kind of identity for a market that is otherwise very crowded and confusing, and I'll explain why. Front is the product category in itself. It sits at the intersection of these really three different trends. First is email, because it looks and feels like an inbox, and you connect your email service to it, and you get your emails through it. So it's the front end interface to how you use email. It also has a sort of collaboration component. I'm able to use things like, I'm able to mention my CEO on a customer escalation email that I get, and get her take on it. I can draft a response for her to respond back to the customer. So there's this like collaboration component that goes so much more than CC and BCC, right? And then the third side of it is the value to the customer. And so we're able to turn our email into a multiplayer mode where if a customer emails us, 1 million people, whoever the right people are, can have access to that email and get back to the customer faster. And so we're able to deliver a better customer experience, and people are using us instead of help desks because they're like, I don't want to treat a customer like a ticket number and tell them to wait, 24 hours to get a response. They're emailing us or they're texting us. I want to get back to them through that channel fast and with the right answer. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say, and maybe perhaps like Gainsight, we're not email, we're not help desk, and we're not like a Slack competitor. We're not in the collaboration space, but we're kind of a little bit of all of these things. And so the message that we're trying to bring out to the market is, at the end of the day, companies want to get closer to their customer. That's kind of the big kind of mega trend. And what we've seen is, in general, we use email as our main communication channel between customers. But that paradigm hasn't changed. I think Gmail was last revisited 20 years ago. So that hasn't really changed for the last several years. And so we've basically built an interface to power the heart of your business, the space where your employees and your customers interact. And we think that broader category, that home, is really around customer communication. So customer communication isn't necessarily a new category. We use Drift for chat, we use email, we use help desk, we use all these things, but we want to sort of put a box around that category and say, there's actually a new initiative within organizations that's really focused on getting closer to the customer, and it's called customer communication, and Front's leading that effort and helping to define what that means. So it's tricky, right? It's not a new category necessarily, but it's a new philosophy that we want people to think about that our product ultimately can help enable.
Yeah, and do you think about that as a new category? How do you think about it? Do you say that we're creating a new category, or we're carving out space? Yeah. The one question that I had recurring while reading the book was that is category creation just another way of saying positioning?
It's a part of it, for sure. It's choosing to position more than just your products, but then I'd say the category part of the equation is positioning meets business strategy, meets market sizing. And then underneath all of that is the brand tactics to activate it. That's sort of the nuance. And so it's sort of a choose your own adventure thing, right? If you're like, hey, we're disrupting a market, great. But you still have to build brand and convict your audience and host a conference. All that stuff's like table stakes now, right? Your competitors have a podcast if you don't, ultimately. So that's sort of the understanding, I guess, in the market. But if you choose category creation, it's gonna be a different positioning strategy altogether, and you might have to think about your TAM a little bit differently. But then these tactics are still going to have to reflect. Are still have to be implemented, but perhaps now is a reflection of more than just your products.
Yeah, let's dig in a little bit more into your your transition into Front, because I feel like it'll be quite relevant to a lot of marketers and people who just haven't thought about this, because unlike Gainsight, where you were the founding member, right, where you were thinking about it from zero when there was nothing, to joining a company which has lots of users and lots of customers and lots of revenue. And what did your first few weeks look like? What did you do? Like, are you interviewing, Matil, like trying to figure out what is the why behind this company? Are you talking to customers? What are you doing the first few weeks?
I have a cop-out answer, unfortunately.
Oh,
I appreciate how hard it is coming in and being the new person.
yep.
And a company that, to your point, was established, 6,000 customers, like, well on their way from a growth perspective, like 150 employees when I joined. To be the new guy to come in and say, we're going to change everything isn't a recipe for success. So what I did very early on was make a case to the business to bring in an outside agency. And so this, depending on, for folks listening, the size of company and your marketing budget, I appreciate some of this is may be applicable, may not be. But the point that I wanted to make was we have a lot of bias as a business because we've been staring at this thing for years. And me coming in, I have bias with my last company that I have to be cognizant of. Let's bring in a third party that are experts in articulating a brand strategy, help get us all on the same page and give us a framework by which we can leave that process by having made a decision on who we are, what we stand for, what we believe, who we're for, and all these types of things. We worked with an incredible agency called 21st Century Brand, the former CMO of Airbnb that had started it. And we just believed really deeply into the way they understood brand. And we went into this journey, this like 6-month journey that ironically ended right before COVID started. But it was an exploration of the human experience with work. And what was so interesting is COVID just was sort of a proof point afterwards for a lot of what we found, because what we found is all of us are tired of being busy all the time, or at least celebrating busyness. And we talk about productivity as a way to do more and squeeze more into each day, and this sort of like hustle culture that's developed. And for some people, not trying to virtue signal, for some people that's great and that drives them. For other folks that have children at home or competing priorities, getting work done and then being able to turn off work, being able to disconnect is pretty important. So ultimately, what our research found through that project was the future of work is not about more and more, busyness, more productivity, just kind of this endless rush of like volume of work. It's about the why. Why do we work? And what our research found is we work to make an impact. That's the highest order benefit we want to get from our job. I want to impact my company's mission. I want to impact my customers and what they're trying to do with our products. I want to impact my team and what they're, the products that we're working on. Now I want to impact my own career, my own professional development. And so impact became this very powerful kind of idea for us. And as I mentioned, when COVID happened, now we all see that, the getting on that flight to meet that customer, commuting back and forth from your local city, whatever it is that you're doing and the trade-offs that you're making, we're now forced to not do that and be at home and try to maximize our impact in an otherwise very difficult kind of situation, whether you're watching your children at home or whatever the case may be, homeschooling. So I say all that because we did that process and it helped us understand that we exist as a company to help people make an impact at work. And that's sort of a belief that a lot of our co-authors of the Future of Work movement aren't taking, where for them, they're taking a position of like, let's just do more through all these various channels and, all of this sort of like product-led approach to the future of work, where we think the future of work is better articulated as an expression of why we work in the first place. And especially in this new normal, when we get back in person, it's going to be different. So we're excited to help lead that conversation.
Cool. Let's just wrap up with audience questions. So first question from Taco. How do we strike a balance between product differentiation and brand story, especially in a crowded vertical?
Yeah. Well, they go hand in hand. because I think the best way I kind of visualize this, it's a little academic and weird, but the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Ultimately, your customers, your prospects are trying within their profession to climb up that pyramid. They're trying to get towards self-actualization. They want to be better at their jobs. They want to get promoted. They want to solve complex problems. And your product has a big role to play in doing that. Your product helps enable a lot of that. And so the case that I'm sort of making, I think, on the call here is that it's more than just your product. Your content, your thought leadership, your best practices, the community that you help kind of create and fostering that sense of belonging. All of that stuff is sort of the companion to building a great product, and being able to articulate the value of your product. So they go hand in hand. It would be a bad, just to go off this last example, if we talked about impact but didn't show you how a certain feature or a certain use case of our product can help you create impact, then we're missing the mark, because brand is now disconnected from product. And so the two have to go together very closely. The issue, of course, is, well, with finite resources and time, how do we prioritize our effort here? I think that's the trick, depending on what size of company you're at. But ultimately, I think keeping product marketing focused on positioning the product and the use cases and understanding your personas and all that sort of stuff, while your content team or brand or whoever can help tell kind of the bigger story and the application of that product value into the market. That's, I think, the connection you should aim for.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, there was a quote in the book that I loved, which I'm gonna just copy paste it into the chat, which is, you'll feel like you're spending more time creating content about the category than your own products, a feeling you need to become comfortable with.
Yeah, your point. It is controversial for sure. I think it also depends who's reading that and at what stage of company you're reading that quote. Because I'd say your content marketing machine should hopefully at scale be able to do both. But there's always that temptation of, gosh, we're really talking a lot about how to host a QBR meeting, like I said, and not enough about like that new use case or that new feature that's shipping next week. So I think that tension is good to have, and a very real tension that will exist.
Cool. Next question from Rack, which is, brand is increasingly becoming a differentiator signal in B2B software. Companies that use Slack are perceived as cooler and more attractive than companies that use WebEx. Do you think that's a byproduct of excellent tooling or a calculated effort that brand teams make from day one?
Yeah, I think in both, just to use those examples, in both Slack and Zoom's case, it's pretty clear they built a 10x product that you get into the product experience and you're like, this is unlike anything I've had before, and I immediately get value. And so from that perspective, I'd say that's been a big contributor to their growth. It's also that they're both the types of products you don't need to be a departmental leader with a budget ascribed to that technology. It's not much of a considered purchase relative to a CRM tool, for example, or something along those lines. So it's very easy for the product flywheel to take off. And I think over time now, Slack, as an example, is starting to do more of the brand thing. They're trying to educate folks that email is not the place for customer communication and some of these other things. And I think that we'll see how they do, and really getting to consensus on that. Some counter examples perhaps are like, I use Drift as an example, where Intercom was in market with the same dang product, for years before. And how did Drift catch up? They went all in on brand, and they went all in on telling a bigger story than just the product capabilities. And I think that helped build a lot of momentum behind their company. So I'd say it sort of depends. If you feel like you're building the next Airbnb, the next Slack, the next Zoom, then and you're either a consumer business that can kind of get that flywheel going, or it's not as much of a considered purchase, and anyone with a credit card can get started. You might think about sequencing some of the stuff out, right? And then over time doing more on the brand side. I think you'll have to do it at some point. But I think if you don't have the 10x product, you can still build a successful business. But I think you need to really focus in on some of the content work and some of the brand work early.
Yeah, that was one of my learnings also, which was that you don't have to build a 10x product, which is something you hear about. Like that's not something that people go around saying,
Totally.
because what everyone says, oh, you need to build a 10x product,
Yeah.
and
Is Salesforce in its early days a 10x product, or at least in the last 20 years? Is it still a 10x product? I'm not sure, but
yeah,
you can't be a sales rep and not use Salesforce,
yep.
and you have to ask why. And I think they've done a really good job of proving that brand can, not always, but can beat product.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Next question from Corinne, which is, while you're creating a category, how do you think about helping your product champion within your customers find the budget needed to create this market?
Totally. And this is, we didn't touch on this enough, but like it's super important that you treat your customers as the early adopters of this new thing, as champions, as heroes. And so it puts an increased focus on your customer success team or your customer marketing team or whoever to really kind of go and champion their success. So now early, you're talking about how do we go and get budget? And I think that some of the things that we've done successfully over the years is give them the tools they need to procure product for a problem that they typically not procured product for. So what does that mean? We created some late stage content like a customer success technology buyer's guide. And we wrote it, but we positioned it as like a market guide for buying software in the space. There might have been a little bias in how we positioned certain things, right? We built some content around an RFP template. If you want to do an RFP for this market, these are the questions you should be asking. We do a budgeting guide. We actually had a budget template that we released that said, hey, if you're a VP of customer success or a director or whatever, you're doing some planning for next year, we'll save you time. Click and download our budget, and this will have everything you need for next year, including a line item for our software that we've magically placed in there. So the point is, these are late stage content assets by definition. And what I think the big kind of aha for us was we were going to evangelize those content assets earlier in the funnel. So we were going to treat that as thought leadership when really it was meant to live in like a Showpad or some guru or some type of like sales enablement toolkit. We promoted it and we tried to drive a lot of eyeballs to it. So we tried to basically create a process where process didn't exist. And maybe the last thing I'll say is ROI. If you can show dollar impact of your services to the customer, and that's much easier for them to justify an investment if they can prove the value of the investment up front.
Cool. So last question is from me, which is something that I was thinking about, and it's a little broad and open-ended, but I'm very curious to hear your take. Is like, how, I'm sure you're hiring people and talking to a lot of marketers. Like, what do you think separates a good marketer from a great marketer?
Good question. I think it's tricky maybe to bring in a basketball reference since we opened with one. It's tough to see what makes a good center from a point guard. I think there's different like specialties and different kind of focus areas. So as I think about the three kind of main ones, it's the brand marketers, the demand marketers, and the product marketers. But I think if you're a head of marketing or a CMO or a leader of kind of all three, you sort of need to like pick one you're great at, pick another that you're good at, and then hire someone better than you for the third one is sort of one way to think about it. Right. Although if you hire somebody better than you for all three, you're in even better shape. So, on the brand side, and, admittedly, I think this is where I tend to spike more than the other two. There's sort of this appreciation for storytelling, this idea of being like an idea person or being, creative in that sense. I think you get a lot of energy off of working out of PowerPoint more than working out of Excel. Like it's that type of kind of person. So I think those are the folks that tend to do well in brand, maybe ones that can be good writers and that sort of thing. On the demand side, it's more systems and data and, being able to like thrive in a spreadsheet and working on models and configuring data dashboards and having sort of that appreciation for the engine that I have like a minor degree only because I had the opportunity to work with somebody that's really, really great at that. And I've learned from him. But that's something that I think there are people that are just world class at. The understanding channel activation, how to convert pipe, all that sort of stuff. That person also, the trick for them, they have to love working with sales. That's somebody that's going to be great, has to like thrive on working with sales and have sort of a servant leadership kind of mindset in working with your sales team. And product marketing team is the one that's a little bit more difficult because it's the most complex, I think, job, and maybe potentially the entire organization, but certainly within marketing, because you have to be a swivel chair for the product team, the sales team, the customer success team, the marketing team. And it's really difficult. I would say they sort of have to be like brand, and there's spike in storytelling and positioning and that sort of thing, but also very technical, or an appreciation for the technical side of the job, because you're ultimately, your audience is the product team, and your customer internally in some cases is the product team for at least a part of your job. And so you have to be dangerous enough to represent the product. So it's a broad answer, but I think like a great CMO can again pick one that they're great at, and then hire lieutenants that can kind of fill in the blanks.